think anyone can point out the numerous visual inconsistencies that this show has going for it. General walk animation, character designs, they dip constantly. But even with all that said, it still is one of the best anime you can watch this season, and I see week after week people saying, yeah, it doesn't have the greatest production value, but this is like legit, it's being carried by its amazing story and characters. As I've been saying, this anime hits different. For an episode that actually had some incredible fight animation, which up to this point really, the production value has been more focused on key character moments like those facial expressions, the body reactions, and honestly a lot of the general action, while interesting and different, wasn't really the front and center focus, but you go up against his like nanomachine golem, which honestly was animated quite well. It didn't feel like a 3D mess, it didn't feel like a weird blob that didn't have creative moves. No, the thing was honestly really cool. And in this episode, the general characters were actually more inconsistent than the fight, which is kind of a first out of these 4 episodes. And yeah, would I like better production values in a lot of the scenes? Absolutely. But it doesn't change the fact that this show is just so different by just taking slight detours. Instead of going down the predictable path, it says, hey, why don't we actually just try to do something a little different? And in doing so, you get an anime that, yes, maybe has a lower production value than a lot of shows airing this season, but it doesn't change the fact that it's using what it's got, it's working with what was dealt to them, and they're making sure they get to the finish line as strong as they possibly can. And this show, for having 4 adventurers who were abandoned in different ways and struggled to trust, they're rebuilding that trust, and in doing so, we're exploring a world that's honestly unlike a lot of shows out there, and I really enjoy what I'm seeing. Now, before we jump any further, I do gotta mention, we do have a full live reaction to today's episode available on my Patreon, so if you want to see that, consider supporting. But yeah, this episode and this show in general, I truly think is one of this season's best. Not to say there's not a lot of good shows to pick from, but there is something about a show that feels so familiar on paper, but every time I watch an episode, I just say, nothing quite hits exactly like this. And I made the comparison, I think it was in last week's video, to The Faraway Paladin, which was another show that a lot of it on paper is very similar, but the idea of a paladin and the way the adventure went in that show, the family bonds, it turned it into something quite different. And for a show where you have these 4 adventurers who are building this trust and are doing these missions and are building a genuine connection, but they still recognize they need their personal space, that after a mission they finally have their money, Nick's gonna go basically party at the Idol concert, we have our girl wanting to go gamble, we have wanting to do this or that. Everyone has their own hobbies, and they make sure not to overstep, right? And we get introduced to a new character, Kizna, who is this sword, who honestly wasn't expecting to turn into a human at all. I didn't really look at the character listings on sites like Mal, so I just thought it was just some random person in the background when they're handing in the sword, especially given that the VA was completely different from sword form to body form. But I kind of like the idea that you have this talking sword that was sealed away by the guild long ago, and now the guild was like, hey, go get the sword and we'll give you like a ridiculous amount of money. I mean, we've seen how damn bad they've been in terms of struggling to even pay for a single night with a roof over their head. Now they have an entire stack of coins, and I have to admit, the way Nick was grabbing those coins and like stacking them with one hand motion, that dude has some skills, I'm not gonna lie. I just like the fact that this show is all about the characters first and foremost, their trauma, and the fact that Nick has been so down in the dumps about destroying this amulet that meant so much to Curran. And she, in this moment when she was trying to remove him from the rubble, they finally had that heart-to-heart, that she was happy that he broke it, and they hadn't had that conversation, so from his point of view, he was just under the assumption she was being quiet and, you know, there was something building there. There was something festering that could then implode at a moment's notice, and clearly he doesn't want everyone to explode in different ways. But the fact that she's been holding on to that amulet, waking up each day, looking at those fond memories, not being able to believe that someone she loved and cared for could truly abandon her, and that someday he would come back. So him breaking that amulet was literally the chains, the shackles came off, and she truly was able to start living for herself for once. I still think we'll see that scumbag eventually someday, as he did steal something very important from her, but in terms of letting our dragon girl be free and start to have that second chance at life, this was an absolutely incredible moment and a heart-to-heart that they needed in the middle of a life or death battle. And as I mentioned, that fight was really cool. I really liked what they'd done. I like how they handled slimes, I like how they're handling the monsters in general in this world, but the fact that they really did go into the production value. I mean, this could have been a horrible mess of a fight. It could have been like this weird monster that just, you could tell like, oh man, it's like one of those like horrible 3D moments. It easily could have been that. But instead, it basically acted like a giant slime, all things considered, but it was from nanomachines. So you cut it, it repairs, you get a little piece off, and then he tries to climb up your leg to probably try to strangle you. The fact of the matter was, it was a really fun fight, and they had fun with the magic. At one point, they freeze it, and then it kind of like splits out of the ice shell and just kind of comes marching down. There's a lot of cool things, and then they decided to go full-on Power Rangers, and they morphed into a 1-2 combo. I mean, it was kind of cool seeing Nick in an armor and kind of have like the dragon tail, and he just flies in. That wasn't the craziest animation. Honestly, the best animation across the entire episode was generally this creature that they were fighting, this like nanomachine golem. But in terms of looking cool, I thought they got that across, and then to see them just kind of like go collect their reward, this show's not going to be the best anime of the year, and I don't think it's going to be the overall best anime of the season, but I do think it's going to be one of the most important and one of the most remembered shows, at least for me. I look at shows like The Faraway Paladin, and there's not many shows that I can say, maybe it wasn't my overall favorite of the year, but it's the show I still think back on whenever something goes slightly different and turns a typical cliche mundane thing into something that I can't help but gush about. And that's the exact same way I'm feeling about this show, and I really enjoy what they're doing. I think the VAs are having fun. I feel like they're getting across their trauma, but also doing it in realistic ways in terms of they're not going to constantly be down in the dumps. It's not like they were, constantly stabbed and tortured and things like that. Yes, they've all suffered horrible things, some worse than others, but all things considered, their current environment isn't hostile. So it makes sense that in general, their rule set lets them enjoy each other's company, go through their missions, go through the motions, and be able to live their life rather than just sitting in a corner being upset all day. It can happen like that, but should all four of them be like that? No, it wouldn't make a lot of sense if I'm being honest. And the fact that a drunken tableside conversation turned into one of the better shows that you can follow this season, I really enjoy it. Not saying it would be better if a more refined production style, of course, but for a studio that's working in such limitations to be able to pump out week after week even better episodes, and I would argue the fight in this episode was probably the best looking fight we've seen out of the four, they're working with a lot of limitations, and bless them, they are doing their job because this show continues to be one of my more anticipated ones every single week. Probably helps that it doesn't air on the weekend like 90% of the shows, and also it kind of just sits nicely on that Tuesday where I know I'm going to watch and enjoy it and move on with my day, and I just get to reflect on it all day, and I really enjoy what I'm seeing. But of course, I'll pass the torch over to you. What did you think of episode 4? Are you agreeing with me that this is one of the stronger shows of the season, or maybe this is just a show that you watch, you enjoy, but you don't think quite as highly as me? Do let me know what you're feeling, because this is a show that I find very fun to talk about, and the fact that for such a lower production value show, to be something that it's not even just me, I've seen constantly a bunch of people say this is actually one of their more anticipated. It says a lot about how quality the writing actually is when a lower production value show can still stand toe to toe with some of those shows that are getting hyped up as much as they are. But yeah, thoughts and feelings down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here. Be sure to ring that bell if you want to get as many notifications to the channel as possible. Like I mentioned, full live reaction is available on my Patreon, and while you're there, you'll also get yourself a video shoutout like Marsh, Matthew, and Matthew Stibbins are getting today. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care and have a good one.